I was browsing Game Jolt looking for a game to make a video on when all of a sudden I got a notification from a friend on Discord telling me about the game this video is about, Tealerland. Now Tealerland is a fan game that came out around August of 2021. Now the reason I chose Tealerland is due to the fact of how different this game is from any other FNAF fan game I've played so far. And that's due to the fact that a lot of fan games, especially in that era, still follow the old formula of sitting in your office and trying to survive, and that being the entire game. But before I get off track, let's actually jump into the most important part of any game, the gameplay. Now when you start up the game, you're greeted by a little cutscene showing off one of the animatronics. We'll be getting into that later. And when you press the new game button, you get some basic information on why you're at the Tealerland Park. And to sum it up, your name is David and you're one of the co-founders of Tealerland together with your brother called Teal. Hence the name Tealerland. Now after that short exposition dump, you get thrown into the main menu where you can start your shifts. Now this game is actually split up into different hours instead of the traditional night system, and I'll be explaining what happens every hour and exactly what mechanic it adds. And to start with the first technical hour, the surface. Now the surface kind of serves as a prologue to the game, as the section basically starts you off in front of a abandoned building of Tealerland with some text at the top telling you the controls, use your button, and use WASD to move around. And as soon as you decide to go into the park, you're greeted with 3 divergent paths you can go to. Now you can either press A to go to the left, D to go to the right, or W to continue forward. Now the first thing I did on my playthrough is that I instantly went to the left, as that was the first path I myself saw, and I actually got quite lucky here as I found a lore paper. And lore papers only spawn randomly every night, and they give you some information about the lore of this place, of course. And in my honest opinion, there should have been a guaranteed lore paper spawn at least somewhere, as it would have told the player what they look like and how to grab them, and even told the player of their presence, but luckily enough they aren't that important to gameplay. You also have the right side, which has nothing of importance, same as the left side, unless you like cool structures to look at. But finally, with those 2 irrelevant paths out of the way, I pushed onward and moved some trash bags out of the way to reveal a ladder. Now this is the first real gameplay section of the game, where you have to climb down a ladder and flash your flashlight at us, who I believe is Tealer, who randomly appears when you go down. Now this minigame was kind of confusing for me at first, because the game clearly says that you have to listen for noise cues to know when to stop and flash your flashlight, but I never heard them and I died quite a few times. I found that the easiest solution to that problem is to just stop every time you make it to around 25% down the ladder, which usually works out for me. I didn't really like this section of the game, but the rest of the game does make up for it luckily. And after you finally make it down to the bottom, you get thrown back straight into the main menu and welcome with one of the best OSTs a fan game can offer. Like, not even joking, I really loved this OST. And like I said before, the game is split up into hours, kind of like the Freddy Files, where you don't return to the Tealerland Park every day, but you play in it like through shifts basically, which does make for a pretty unique experience. But let's get into the game itself, you know. The game, of course, starts with a tutorial which explains the mechanic, but I think the tutorial is incredibly overwhelming. It's just a bunch of text, which nobody's reading all that, bro. Nobody's reading all that. So I'll explain the mechanics by myself as they, appear in the game, just to make it like a tad bit easier to understand. Otherwise, it is just incredibly confusing, trust me. Okay, now we're finally onto the gameplay section, the thing you guys have all been waiting for. And as soon as you start your first hour, you get thrown into an office. Now there are a few things you can do in your office. You can either open up the computer in front of you, which I'll explain later what exactly its uses are since it has multiple, or you can go to your left and check on the door that has a keyhole where you can also, peep in the hole to check for animatronics. Trust me, that'll be really handy later on. Alright, and as soon as you go through the door with the keyhole on your left, you'll arrive in a little hallway where you can either go back to the office or go into the storage room. Now in the storage room, there's an animatronic that actually helps you called the Lore, but you first have to assemble it to actually use it. And to do that, you have to find some parts of him that are either in the small little hallway you entered through or in the storage room itself. And there are 3 pieces in total that you have to collect. Now after you collect all the parts, you have to hold your mouse button in the storage room to put the animatronic back together. together, which takes a little while, and after that you can actually play the game. Alright, now this is where the actual PC comes in. You have to go back to your office, go onto the computer, and now you might notice that you can move a little icon, which is basically the lore walking around in the establishment. And this is the main mechanic that the entire game revolves around. And it's also how you beat a majority of the hours. And that's due to the fact that this game doesn't require you to wait a specific amount of time, like 6 minutes till you reach 6 AM. This game actually discourages that by taking your time, by using a little timer at the bottom of the night once you beat it, showing you how long it took you to beat that hour in specific. Now basically what you're supposed to do is lure the unfriendly animatronics to a door, and once they're there you can lock them inside a room, disabling them for the rest of the hour. My headcanon is that you just put a chair in front of the door and they just can't open it anymore. That's just a headcanon though. Now you might be thinking that this actually sounds incredibly easy, which is also what I thought at first, but a few problems come up with the introduction of the corruption mechanic. Simply put, an enemy animatronic can corrupt your lore by being in proximity to it and basically disable it for a while. And to fix that, you have to go back in the storage room, open up a special little menu, click on the corrupted file, which is indicated by having Zanny in front of its name. And now you might be thinking again, this doesn't sound too hard. Where does the difficulty come in? And the answer to that question is a small little hallway I mentioned earlier. And that's due to the fact that certain animatronics can enter the hallway, and depending on what animatronic is in the hallway itself, you have to do something a little unique. You know what, I'll take Tealer as an example, just as a little teaser for you guys. Now, Tealer basically shows up in the hallway and you have to leave as quickly as possible, otherwise you lose HP. Actually, now that I'm talking about it, yeah, this game has a HP mechanic where you don't instantly die if you get jump scared, so you can make mistakes, and you can also restore some of your HP with a syringe that's found in the storage room. And actually, this is also another transition into the next thing I'd like to talk about, the animatronics. Now in this section, I'll obviously be talking about the animatronics, and I'll be talking about them in the order they appear in the game. So let's start with Hour 1. Hour 1 has the mascot of the franchise, Tealer, and a smaller character called Willow. Now I'd like to start talking about how I absolutely love these character designs and actually how original they are. Tealer is an animatronic dragon, which to my knowledge has not been done in a fan game before, and Willow is a wyvern, which I also think has not been done before in any fan game. They look absolutely fabulous. Like, the modeling work is incredible in this game. You cannot rip on it. And also the medieval style that the animatronics have, I absolutely love it. And the designs are just simple enough to where they are pleasing to look at. They aren't like Dormant Abyss designs where there's just too much going on. Alright, but enough about me gushing about the designs and onto the animatronics themselves and the mechanics they have. This game is two types of animatronics. I'll call the first type active animatronics and the second type non-active animatronics. Active animatronics are the ones that you have to lure by sitting next to them for a few seconds, using the lure, bringing them to a door, and locking them inside. The non-active animatronics are more passive, as they act more as hallway threats that make it so you don't stay huddled in your office the entire game, and spice up the gameplay just enough where it doesn't just become an office simulator. Now the first animatronic I'll start explaining is Tealer, and then I'll move on to Willow. Now Tealer is an active animatronic, and he acts like a regular FNAF animatronic where he enters through the hallway, which you can hear with a very distinct noise cue. And you're supposed to stay in your office and not look in the keyhole unless you want to lose some good old HP. Now, he isn't that hard to deal with, but in conjunction with other animatronics, he can be a real pain in the ass, trust me. Now, Willow is the first passive animatronic you meet, obviously. Basically, all Willow does is play a small noise cue, and when you hear it, you're supposed to go into the hallway, stare at her for a few seconds, and she will just go away. And that's actually all for the first hour. Now, the first hour is more of an introductory hour, of course. Like most FNAF fan games, the first hour is never that bad, and the only animatronic that really possesses a threat is Willow, who can be warded off incredibly easy. You can just lure Tealer within a few seconds, lead him to the door, lock him up, and then you're done. That's all. But before we go on to the next hour, which is hour 2, I'd like to talk about the token mechanic, actually. Now, every hour you beat, you get basically tokens, which you can use in the perk shop on the menu. Think of it kind of like an item shop. Every night you beat, you get tokens that you can spend on perks. Now the weaker perks cost 2 points, and then you have the stronger ones which cost 4. Now in my opinion, the 2-point perks really aren't worth your time, just don't get them, but the 4-point ones are actually incredibly good and they can really save runs. They've saved runs for me at least. But if you noticed, you only get 1 token per hour. Now you might be asking, oh, how do you get good perks if there's only 5 hours and you get 1 point per hour? Wouldn't you only be able to get like 1 good perk and just have 1 spare token laying around? And the developer's response to that is hard mode. Hard mode is an optional 2020 mode that you can do for every hour. It grants you 2 extra points every time you beat an hour on hard mode. Now I personally would advise you take the speed upgrades for 4 points, as the lore can be incredibly slow at times, and I mean like slug pace. But with that bit of information out of the way, let's get into the second hour finally. Now the second hour and most hours after this have the exact same mechanics as the first one, with the exception of hour 3, but we aren't at that hour yet. And also the final hour, which guess what, we aren't there yet, we're at hour 2. But with the other hours just adding new animatronics to ward off, these sections will be a lot shorter, don't worry. And hour 2 is included in those nights, so let's talk about the animatronic that gets added. Now hour 2 only adds 1 animatronic, so this section will again be extremely short. But the animatronic that gets added is Vril. Now Vril is the second most aggressive animatronic that you're gonna have to lure and put in their place. Vril has a very basic mechanic where he can enter the hallway and this time you have to look through the keyhole to get rid of him, basically the polar opposite of Tealer. Or if you see him in the hallway, you have to stay still and look at him. Now Vril and Tealer on their own aren't that bad. I actually thought they were incredibly easy in the first few hours of the game. I was like, damn, this game is incredibly easy. But later on, as more animatronics get added, it gets a lot worse. But that's all for hour 2. It adds Vril, who could be annoying sometimes, but he isn't that big of a threat. Now hour 3 is where it actually gets interesting. The game adds 1 last new mechanic, at least until the final hour, and the last aggressive animatronic you're gonna need to lure. And I'll start with talking about the new animatronic, because it's the easiest, Tacy. Tacy works just the exact same as Vril, except they can be harder to spot, but she just acts like Vril 2.0. There's nothing interesting, which I find pretty disappointing. I was like, damn, a new animatronic? Well, what interesting mechanic? Oh, and it just ended up being Vril again. Like, okay. But this hour does make up for it by adding a new mechanic. It adds the fuel mechanic. In this night and the ones moving forward, the building only has a specific amount of power that can run out, and if that happens, you can't lure animatronics into rooms anymore and you have to refuel. Now to refuel, it's pretty easy. All you have to do is grab a jerry can that you can see on your map with the lure, bring it to a generator icon, and it'll fill up automatically. This mechanic at first was really hard to understand because once again, the game really just loves to throw big walls of text at you, and they're like, oh yeah, just read this, and then that's all. But after a while, you get used to it, and overall, it's a pretty good mechanic to spice up the gameplay. The game explains it incredibly poorly though. This game really isn't that good at explaining. Alright, now, hour 4. Hour 4 adds 1, technically 2 new animatronics called Mischievous and his puppet the doll. Now we really love this concept of an animatronic that can put dolls in your office, and it's kind of like a puppet master. I always love those type of characters. Technically, it's kind of like Digital Location did this with Bon Bon and Funtime Freddy, but those had a mind of their own, which the puppet in this game is just directly controlled by Mischievous. Their mechanic is very easy though. You can hear them in the hallway blasting their music, and depending on which room you are, Mischievous will put the puppet in either the office or the storage room. And if you don't grab the puppet quick enough, you'll die. Now during his music phase, you also can't go into the hallway, so that can sometimes mess you up if your lore gets glitched, for example, and you have to repair it. As if your lore gets to 0 HP, you just automatically die. It bypasses the HP and you die. Now hour 4 plays the exact same otherwise as the other hours, except it's just way harder. Like the AI is pumped all the way up, and it can be a real challenge to beat. But for the rest, it kind of just plays out as a regular night. But now onto the semi-last section of the game, hour 5. Now hour 5 is just the exact same as hour 4. It doesn't add anything, it's just the AI is pumped all the way out. It's kind of boring, but I'm not a big fan of it. But the beast that is hour 6 makes up for it, alright? Trust me on this one. But that's all about hour 5. It's a very short section. Let's go on to hour 6, the most interesting hour of them all. Hour 6 is the most unique part of the game so far, as it doesn't take place in the office itself, but it's just in an entirely different location with 2 animatronic threats, new ones too. That being triple question mark, not even joking, that's the name of the extras menu, and your good old friend T-Lore. But this time he's fighting against you. This art, like I said before, doesn't take place in the office, but it's more like a cave setting where you can turn around to look in the cave and flash your flashlight, or look at the monitors where it has like a sensor where you can see where T-Lure is. You can also open doors to explode generators. Now, I'll actually start by explaining the entire, exploding generator part, because you might be wondering, like, how does that work? And after I explain that mind-blowing mechanic, I'll get into triple question mark and T-Lore. And honestly, this hour boils down to go to PC, open room door, hold the white button to charge up the explosion of the generator, and then explode the generator while T-Lore is inside of it, inside of the room itself. Basically, to explode generators, you have to hold a white little button, and then as soon as it reaches 99, you press it again, it can explode, which deals damage to T-Lore, because he has a little HP bar at the top of the screen if you haven't noticed already. There might be some blind viewers in the audience. And you have to bring his HP to 0, obviously. Now, there's a little caveat to that, where you can only hold the doors open for a certain amount of time, and they do have a slight cooldown when you use them, so it didn't just spam the door opens and just give T-Lore some Iraq flashbacks, And on top of that, every time you hold the white button, the screen goes black, and you only hear the beep sound that Tealer makes on the map to see if he's moved or not. So then you just have to rely on your noise cues, which is really hard. And you only have to do this 4 times to fully deplete Tealer's HP fully, which might not seem like a lot, but the generators do take a pretty long time to charge up. And if Tealer gets close to you and enters the cave, you have to use your flashlight to ward him off, which you only have a limited time to do so, by the way. Fun fact. Oh yeah, he also gets way more aggressive the lower his HP is, and with triple question mark can also prevent you from looking inside the cave. This hour becomes a real fun little challenge, but it actually does manage to be fun. I'm just playing around. The night is actually fun. I myself found the best strat to be already charge up a generator before T-Lore's there, then luring him in and then just exploding it within a second. And I've already explained kind of what T-Lore and triple question mark do, but I'll explain it in a little more detail here. Now, T-Lore acts like a regular animatronic, kind of like the Return to Bloody Knight's puppet, where you have to flash a flashlight at him if you see his face in the cave, which is indicated by a noise cue. And triple question mark basically prevents you from looking inside the cave or accessing the PC, with the only way to get rid of him is to turn around to the other side. Now, this by far is my favorite night of the entire game, as there haven't been that many fan games who add a boss battle at the end like this and actually managed to make it, enjoyable, which is pretty important for a video game. It does feel a little unfair at times due to T-Lore's speed, but it isn't all that bad, as all you really have to do is optimize your run better, and you'll usually make this run with ease. And after you finally beat this hour, you get a special little cutscene, which I won't explain. I actually wanted to play the game, so I'm not gonna spoil anything too major of the story, and also because I'm not good at lore at all. I'm an absolute imbecile with it. Now, overall, I really love this game, and especially the design of the animatronics and the whole aesthetic of the place. My personal favorite one is actually Mischievous, as I love Jester-like characters, or anything that looks like it. That's also why I love Abraxas from Cruelly Squad, for example. Those type of characters always seem to just take nothing serious, which I just absolutely love. Also really like Tealer's design, especially Repaired Tealer, which you can see in the extras menu after you beat hour 6, just due to the fact that you just don't see a FNAF fan game with dragon characters. I don't know why, there just aren't any fan games with dragons in them. I literally dare you to comment down below a FNAF fan game that has a good dragon character, or at least a medieval aesthetic. I literally have seen none so far except for this game. Now, I didn't talk about one little thing in the game, and that's the custom night, which just adds 2 extra animatronics, which I just really didn't care enough. They don't spice up the gameplay that much, and I just don't really like custom nights. I find them pretty lazy. But no, that's enough about the game, and now onto the final review. Now, this game was just absolutely incredibly visually and gameplay wise. There's nearly nothing to complain about in the visual department, except that the game is extremely dark in my opinion, and it obscures the animatronics and makes them less scary because you just can't see them, which was a pretty big bummer for me, as you don't really get to see the animatronics that much, and when you actually finally do get to see them, they're obscured by the darkness, so you can't see their good designs. And as I keep repeating, I loved the designs of the game, and I just wish we saw saw more of them in game. But other than that, there's literally nothing to complain about except for the first few hours, I guess. And the same goes for the rest of the gameplay, as the other only complaint I have is that the game goes from 0 to 100 incredibly quick without any warning around hour 3 when gasoline gets introduced, as I think the explanation of the mechanic and of most other mechanics is just extremely vague. But other than that, there isn't really anything to complain about. I really enjoyed my time playing this game, and I really implore you guys to check it out. And also, you can tell that the dev put a lot of effort into it, as seen in the dev note in the extras section, which that dev note, I just find it absolutely sweet. Like, just thanking the old players, new players, just everything in between. You can tell that the developer really put their entire heart into this game, and I respect that a lot. But overall, this game was incredibly good. I'll give it a rating of 9.6 Dark Souls copies out of 10. Darkness consumes all.